presidency.
Mr. President, last month, the federal judge in Washington, D.C. ruled that the Department of Homeland Security could not continue to use Title 42 pandemic-related authority to expedite the removal of aliens who enter our country illegally. That's effective as of December 21st. That's today. Though it's been temporarily halted while the Supreme Court hears an emergency appeal, Title 42 is hanging by a thread. It's unconscionable for Congress to stand aside and do nothing to preserve it. Title 42 authority was initially based on the pandemic. And while I agree that the pandemic is over, the border crisis is worse than ever. Whether to keep effective border security policies in place should not depend on whether there's a pandemic. And there's another epidemic plaguing our nation, one that demands immediate attention. Deadly fentanyl, produced with the help of the Chinese Communist Party and smuggled across our southern border by deadly drug cartels, has flooded our communities across America. More than 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses in the last 12 months alone, most of them from synthetic opioids like fentanyl. It's the #1 cause of death for American adults aged 18 to 45. The rise in fentanyl overdoses and deaths affects every state and congressional district. It kills the young and the old, the rich and the poor, people in cities and people in small towns alike. It's not a partisan issue, and finding a solution should not be partisan either. When I talk to Tennessee sheriffs, they tell me that fentanyl is becoming more and more lethal, how a so-called bad batch can kill dozens of people in an instant. Once this deadly substance arrives in American communities, it's too late. We've got to stop it before it crosses our borders. That's why I've introduced legislation that allows for the use of Title 42 authority to stop the smuggling of illicit and lethal drugs like fentanyl. When I traveled to the border in April, Border Patrol agents told me that cartels use waves of illegal border crossings as a cover to transport fentanyl and other deadly narcotics. While Border Patrol agents are focused on managing caravans of border crossers, the gap in coverage is exploited by the smugglers. In many cases, these are well-planned and coordinated occurrences. The agents told me that the people don't stay at the border and the drugs don't either. Title 42 is the last tool Border Patrol has left to partially slow the ongoing tidal wave of illegal crossings. Without this tool, our Border Patrol agents will have no way to slow down the massive increase in illegal immigration, which will get far worse as a result. Mr. President, Americans will pay the price. That's why, given the potential expiration of Title 42 within hours or days, passing my legislation today is imperative. Letting Title 42 end without creating a permanent new authority to replace it empowers drug cartels. It enables them to send migrants across the border at strategic points, bogging down Border Patrol agents with processing that takes 5 times longer without Title 42. Cartels will then use the longer and more frequent enforcement gaps to move more fentanyl across our border. We cannot allow this to happen. My legislation simply adds drug smuggling as an additional basis for using Title 42 authority. It's called the Stop Fentanyl Border Crossings Act. It would allow the Secretary of Health and Human Services to use Title 42 to combat substantial, dangerous drug trafficking across the border. It would give Border Patrol a necessary tool to stop drug traffickers. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions be discharged from further consideration of S. 3959 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reserving the right to object, I share my colleagues' determination to address the opioid crisis. In fact, I worked in a bipartisan way with Senator Burr to ensure that this end-of-the-year spending bill includes serious steps to help our communities. We worked year-round on bipartisan policies to support states as they tackle the fentanyl and a worsening opioid crisis to help people get treatment for substance use disorders and a lot more. So I sincerely hope the senator from Tennessee will join us in voting to get this across the finish line. This is really important to help folks on the front lines of this fight. And of course, we have more work to do here, and I will keep pushing with everything I've got to help fight the opioid crisis. But as I have reminded my colleague before, Title 42 is a public health tool, and how it is used should be guided by public health experts looking at data, looking at science, not politicians looking to score political points. Drug trafficking is a serious problem and one we have law enforcement agencies who are responsible for. We should leave that work to them and support their efforts, and we can do that by passing the omnibus bill, which increases their funding. So while I welcome the opportunity to work with my Republican colleagues on this serious issue, bipartisan solutions are needed to address drug trafficking. We need to build on the strong steps we are taking in the omnibus to fight fentanyl. So at this time, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, we're experiencing a tidal wave at our southern border of illegal immigration, and that tidal wave is going to turn into a tsunami the minute Title 42 is dropped. Title 42 may be removed at any minute, at any hour. It's under a temporary hold after today. More than 100,000 Americans are dying every year because of poisoning from fentanyl coming across our southern border. And I find it especially disheartening that my colleagues are not willing to allow discretionary authority to limit border crossings when necessary to combat substantial and dangerous illicit drug smuggling. Even the Biden administration is already preparing for a tidal wave across this border. Yet my Democrat colleagues can't even agree on a common-sense policy to address this glaring problem. My legislation would work immediately to address this problem. Border Patrol agents are now predicting daily crossings will roughly double to 15,000 to 18,000 per day as soon as Title 42 is lifted. This is going to be truly overwhelming at our border, and the results are predictable. More young Americans will die, and I just don't know how bad this crisis has to get before Democrats will join me to acknowledge it and work to stop it. I yield the floor.